Well, welcome everyone. My name's Ben Pink Dandelion. I'm part of the learning and research team at Woodbrook, and I also look after, in particular, the Centre for Research for Quaker Studies with my colleague Rhiannon Grant. And I'd like to welcome you to the third of our series in Meet the Supervisors, where we have a conversation with one of the supervisors that works as part of the CRQS team. Just to hear a little bit about their academic background, their academic interests, and any tips they have from their own time as a PhD student for anyone considering a PhD degree, MA or PhD, which we offer with the University of Birmingham. So with me today, and it's a great pleasure to see you, Jon, is Jon Kershner, alumni of the Quaker Studies program at the University of Birmingham, but now really one of the leading scholars in Quaker Studies, a very established publication record, editorship of the part of the Brill series in Research Perspectives in Quaker Studies. And yeah, just great to see you again, Jon. Thanks for joining us from Seattle. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Ben. It's great to be here. I am doing well. It is early, and so if my head is a bit foggy, please forgive me, but it's lovely to participate in this conversation and to get a chance to chat with you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jon. So I'm just going to ask a few questions, and hopefully they'll be fairly straightforward. When I was talking with Rhiannon last time, I asked her whether she'd always wanted to be an academic, and I maybe I can put that same question to you.
Oh, that's a great question. No, I did not always want to be an academic. I mean, in fact, the way I grew up in a family where I'm the first generation to have graduated from college.
Okay.
And so that was not within my realm of understanding. I didn't know if I was going to go to college at all when I was young, and then had some great experiences with professors who were mentors to me, and I just found a love of learning and of asking questions, and then trying to figure them out, and so then that led me to a path of trying to do that more and more, and led me to Birmingham to answer my questions about John Woolman.
Yeah, I should, yeah, but we'll come on to John Woolman. But yeah, so can you give us just a brief history of what you studied where before you got to Birmingham?
Yeah, so I was a Christian ministries major at George Fox University with a minor in history. And then I did a Master's of Divinity at Princeton Theological Seminary. And then from there, I went to Birmingham after a couple of years after seminary, went to Birmingham and to do my PhD in theology.
Okay, great. So, and did you go straight from George Fox to Princeton, or was there a gap there as well?
Yeah, there was a gap there, a 1-year gap where I was working as a youth coordinator at a Quaker church in Portland, Oregon.
Okay, so I mean, it's helpful because very few of our students, fit the kind of, maybe what's even a myth now of someone like doing a degree, going straight on to a master's, and then age 22 starting their PhD.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and I think all those experiences, all those the delays, you could call them, or just the experience I had in between were really helpful for me for just solidifying in my mind what I wanted to do, and whether developing like life skills that could then help, that translated into helping me in my PhD research.
Okay.
And I think during those periods, like for my own personal like discernment, it was during those periods where I wasn't in like formal schooling that it really began to set with me that, okay, this research that I'd like to do, has a deep attachment to me, and is something that I want to be involved in, and that then provided motivation to carry on.
Okay, because I think some people, I think, decide they would like a PhD and then look for a topic. But for you, was it that there was a clear topic and then you thought the PhD might be a way to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for me, it was the looking for the topic, and then finding a way to where can I pursue this topic, and that's what led me to the University of Birmingham, which was the only program I applied to, and because I wanted to chase the topic down. So yeah, and then it was about probably while I was in Princeton in seminary that I was actually ever considering, do I want to do like full-time, do I want to be more focused on ministry, or do I want to be focused on academics? And those are that's a false dichotomy, but in terms of like a professional choices, when in grad school, those can be different, it seem like different paths. And so it was really once I got to Princeton that I was more cognizant of wanting to of thinking about these two aspects of my life and how I was going to nurture them. Okay. And so then after Princeton, I did 3 years as a minister of a programmed Friends church, and then did my PhD. So I've done both.
Yeah. And as you say, there it's a false dichotomy in some ways, but
yeah,
it's a professional choice. Yeah. So you said you only applied to Birmingham. Did you look at like schools in the States though to see if you could pursue the woman research there? Or
yeah, I did briefly look around at other schools here in the States, and I think I didn't get very far. Just I think I looked at, I think Wheaton was another one because Mark Knoll was there at the time, and thought that could be a good fit with their program in American history of Christianity. But yeah, I quickly settled on Birmingham and Woodbrook, and which it just seemed to be a good fit.
Okay, well, we're very pleased you did, obviously. So now, in those days, I mean, you did this sort of distance learning in a sense, and under the old system, students would then come to Britain for 6 months of their degree. That no longer happens, but what happens now is people come each year for a residential. How did that work out though? I mean, just kind of working at a distance.
Yeah, it worked out pretty well for me, just based on my life circumstance and my wife's life circumstance. She's a school teacher, so she had summers off, so I would go off to Woodbrook early in the summer, and then she would come and join me and later after her school year concluded and her teaching duties ended for the year. And so then we had this great experience in England several times. Yeah. So I mean, that worked out really well for us. And then I worked during that time as a part-time minister of a Quaker church, and did some substitute teaching and did some other little projects. And so for me, I liked the kind of the independence of being able to from day to day set my schedule and figure out what research I was going to do for that day and develop a plan. And so I liked working independently like that for the most of the year, and then coming to Woodbrook for a couple months, I think usually about 2 months every year, and then being around colleagues for intensive periods.
Yeah, no, good. Yeah, and getting into the I guess, using the library, although you were able to get a lot of stuff digitally and amass copies of things on your, hard drive. And
yeah. I mean, so being at the library was really helpful, because some of the things that Woodbrook just like had on the shelves, like like all these editions of like the Friends Bulletin or something like that, that were just readily available, but that had articles in them or reprints, like Friends Miscellany, for example. Which is, it was so nice to go and just be able to pull it off the shelf so easily, and it's right there. But in for today, just so much of our primary sources are available through EBO and other online kind of scanned, I guess, storehouses, or there's just so much that's available remotely that makes it so accessible to study anywhere where you have a decent internet connection.
Yeah. I mean, we've been finding during the pandemic that some students have been really thwarted because they've been wanting to use local record offices to look at minutes or things like that. But I mean, in terms of texts and particularly published material, it's incredible what's now available just in your living room once you've got the the university access. So and sometimes even without that. So that's good. Yeah. So can you sum up what your PhD was about, just so we have a
So my PhD focused on John Woolman, an 18th century Quaker, and my argument was that Woolman must be understood through the lens of apocalyptic theology, and that his radical vision for the British Atlantic world was apocalyptic, in that he was calling for the direct governance of Christ through all faithful people that would kind of reshape the nature of the development of society. And so, like, an example I give is he thought that merchants should not sail their vessels across the ocean based on economic motivations, but when led by the Spirit. And so he believed when people did that, then a type of like perfected society would arise. So it was just this very this long tradition of discernment and attachment to the will of God. In Woolman, he really wanted to emphasize the possibility of a society that can do that absolutely, and the way then it would treat people, and the difference it would make for society as a whole, and the people who are in it, and what a contrast that is between the world that he saw emerging around him, which was one that he thought was becoming increasingly characterized by greed, and by the desire to control others. And Woolman rejected those motivations and wanted to draw people to this what I call this apocalypse of the heart, this inward experience that then changes not just oneself personally, but the whole social fabric.
I mean, when people hear the word apocalypse, they might think about the end times. So is Woolman thinking that, is it that people have to be perfected in order to help usher in the end times, or that he's in the middle of something that's unfolding? And
exactly. The word apocalypse does it brings like that kind of catastrophic end point in mind, but for Woolman it was the apocalypse itself means like an unveiling, a revealing. And so for Woolman, the apocalypse was this revealing of God's will unfolding on earth, in time, in history, through the people of God. And so he has statements where he describes that God is not sitting idly by while injustice is done. God, there will be a judgment of God, but he what he's calling people to is the government of Christ within, that as it unfolds, that it repairs what he says it repairs the breach, and it repairs those places of separation. So his is not that like that violent catastrophic apocalypticism, but one characterized by what Ben, you and Doug Gwynn and others have talked about in terms of a realizing eschatology that is realizing within time.
Okay. Have you ever, I'm sure you have maybe thought about how Woolman would sit alongside Pentecostalism, or?
Yeah, Woolman, and that's a good question. And I think that those Quakers who, especially even George Fox for that matter, the first few generations, there is a kind of a charismatic thread that runs through their experience, this deep attachment to the Spirit. And then while they would never talk about manifestations of the Spirit, looking back on them historically, there are aspects of their lives that are where they seem to suggest like testimonies, for example, could be examples of these, like the outpouring of the Spirit through the life of the converted. So yeah, I do wonder about that. And actually and so it's interesting, Richard Foster has written about early Quakers, and he characterizes the Quaker movement as a charismatic movement. And some people disagree and have classified it more as a social justice movement. But he characterizes it as a charismatic movement because of that, the inner core being that focus on the life of the Spirit. So yeah, I think there's some interesting parallels and conversation points. I think between like Pentecostalism and charismatic movements and Quakers and Woolman as well. And Woolman lived at this time when some Quakers and some other religious movements like evangelicals were really focusing on this, becoming more and more aware that they had this inner self, that human beings were realizing they had this inward kind of this inward spirit that was a core part of who they were, and that they could listen to that inward part of who they were, and that if they listened to that, then there was something authentic there. And so that's part of evangelicalism, right? Is this like personal experience of God, and that's part of. And so Quakerism has that sense too, and that lays the foundation for later Pentecostal movements.
Yeah, great. Wow. Well, we could talk about this a long time, but yeah, that's really interesting. And as you say, there's still stuff to be unpicked. So yeah. So, one of the differences, I suppose, between coming to a graduate school in Britain and the US is that you're plunged immediately into the research. So there's no classes, you're kind of ABD from day one. And that does mean, though, that part of the application is your research proposal. And that's very important. And normally, we work with students backwards and forwards until we think it's about right, and then we advise them to apply. But the other big moment is, so you start, as knowing kind of, you think you know what you're going to do, and then you collect all this data. And you used Zotero, which is, this system of both of referencing and collecting and data and filing and tagging, and it was hugely impressive. But then at some point you need to decide what the thesis is. And did that come to you early or late, or, it's that kind of light bulb moment where you think, yeah, this is what I'm arguing?
Yeah. So, so like you said, you have your proposal when you apply, and that becomes the thing that you think you are going to be studying. And so I did that too. I had my proposal, and originally my proposal was focused on more on explaining this. I think the way I talked about it was like his social justice or his abolitionist theology, Woolman's abolitionist theology, and I was going to focus on on specifically the elements of theology that related to abolitionism. And then probably over the first year, 10 months to a year of my time at studying, I just began to realize that there was this big question before I could do that. There's this big question that I kept having to kind of like, push off to the side, that was actually the one I needed to answer first, and that was, what was Woolman's theology?
Mm-hmm.
So I revised that proposal, and you revise and you revise, and you get great feedback from your supervisors until you settle on then what will eventually become the argument in your thesis.
Okay. And I remember, I mean, you wrote a lot more than the 80,000 words that in the end forms the PhD. But I guess part of that editing process as well is knowing exactly what you want to be arguing.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's part of it. I mean, I think, we all wish, and maybe this happens for some people, that they just start on day one knowing exactly everything they're going to do, and they go straight in a very straight line. But for me, the whole process, the process of revising and researching and writing itself was part of my thinking, and that whole process helped me to kind of center down on what it was I wanted or needed to study, and so and we should be, I think, open as scholars to the research in front of us, to as we grow in familiarity with the subject, then we become more aware of, oh, well, I think I need to change this, or I need to readjust my focus here because this piece is very important. And so being open to that and willing to change, then I think helps the process be exciting and dynamic, and then we kind of discern with with the material and with the topic what we need to study.
I don't know if anyone finishes writing what they thought they were going to do on day one. I mean, that kind of sea change, and it's almost kind of par for the course. So that's really helpful, that kind of advice, to try and be open, that it keeps it fresh and exciting. And maybe, I mean, while some people would be very anxious about not knowing, there is that element of journey and kind of continual curiosity, I suppose. I wondered if you had any other particular practical tips for people either who are thinking about doing a PhD or who are in the middle of it now.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe, so being open is a big one. So a couple actually. So one would be to maintain, I did this. So don't think, okay, I'm working really hard on my PhD now, and then when I'm done with my PhD, I'll go back to having a normal, balanced life.
Okay.
Take care of yourself during the PhD. Don't say, okay, well, once I've completed this, however many years it takes you to do that, then I'm going to rush through this and work super hard. Then I'll live a balanced life. But I think you need to build in times of rest and reflection with just as a normal course of your weekly rhythm. So I say that. And a second thing would be, pay attention to all the things that you're learning about yourself and about your capacities along the way. So the goal may be this this PhD, right? That might be the target goal, but you're actually learning a lot of stuff about being able to manage projects and being able to handle and conceptualize complex information. And even you're learning skills in like certain researching skills, digital skills, publishing skills, editing skills. You're learning a lot of things, and so I would take note of that, of all the other things that you're learning along your PhD path. And then note keeping is key, and finding a way to do it. So I use Zotero, and I still have, I still use Zotero and have like this massive database of all these notes. But find a method of note taking that you can refer back to. And I started with index cards for my note keeping, and then it just became too much, and it was kind of too slow for me, and so I moved to Zotero, which was easier, and I could take notes on the fly a little bit more quickly, which may have meant that I took way too many notes. But on the other hand, it's a completely searchable database, so that turned, that was a good thing. And now I have all those notes, and they're at the ready all the time. So think about note taking. What system works for you?
Okay, good, thank you. That's really helpful bits of advice there. And I mean, stuff that gets left out of the PhD can be used elsewhere. You can, obviously use for other articles or, so that's good. So what happened to the, you finished the PhD, what did you do with that material? How did you try and get it out there for people to read?
Yeah, so my PhD became I took it to like 2 years maybe of editing, and working on it, trying to make it sound more like a book than a thesis. And just the way I wrote it at first was, it's very much sounded like a thesis. So I went through a process of helping it kind of figuring out what was most important within this document, and what I was most trying to say, and then like developing the sense of like, okay, how can I help my reader, or how can I help others enjoy this material like I did? And so there's kind of this compassion that needs to happen between the writer and the reader, and so about 2 years of that, and then I submitted it to Oxford University Press, and it became a book published in 2018, called John Woolman and the Government of Christ. And so that book then is kind of the core of the ideas around my PhD dissertation, or thesis.
Yes. Did you need to broaden it a little bit to help the publisher think it had some kind of wider application than just Quaker studies? Or
maybe just a little bit, just a little bit. Actually, one of the bigger broadening pieces I did was as a revision to my thesis. When I submitted it, I added, after going to the internal and external examiners, what I was asked to do for it to be accepted was to add another chapter that was a comparative chapter that compared John Woolman to other leading figures, especially in the 18th century. And so I added that chapter for it to be accepted. And then I maintained that chapter into the book. And so it has this nice chapter on comparisons with other figures, which kind of broadens it out and helps see how Woolman fits in with other movements that were going on.
And I know you've had articles in Quaker Studies on Woolman as well, but then you've written in other areas as well. So can suddenly you are Dr. Kershner, and how do you choose what to write on next or research next, or do the opportunities come to you?
Yeah, the opportunities largely came to me, or I was like in the room when they were presented. Excuse me. So yeah, generally, if just being around other Quaker academics, and I think that's just really helpful. There's so many good ideas. It's such a vibrant field, and there's so much need. There's so much work to do, that opportunities came. So I focused exclusively early on John Woolman, but after that I was just interested in like, oh, what about Quakers around the world, and especially outside of European contexts. And so I wrote a chapter on majority world Quakers for the Cambridge Companion that you edited with Steve Angel, and I've written about other elements more broadly, written about Quaker mysticism, and did it. And that volume on mysticism started as a panel in the Quaker Studies group at the American Academy of Religion,
right.
And a collaborative effort with a mysticism group there. So, and then the other group we were presenting with was like, hey, this should be a book. And so we gathered and expanded the book, the articles. Yeah, and just other areas have developed. And so and actually on the 21st of October, I'm going to be presenting on John Dickinson for Jane Calvert's symposium that has been greatly delayed due to the pandemic. But I'll be presenting in a paper on John Dickinson, who's an American was considered a founding father of the United States. And yeah, it's when you are around your colleagues, and especially after you have really honed your skills as a writer and a researcher, then there's a lot of opportunities for other writing that come up.
Yeah, and I think especially, as you say, if you stay open, with that intellectual curiosity, and I mean everything's interesting, and then I think looking at what you've done, you've kind of taken the opportunities that have come and run with them, and been creative. And can you just tell us again what your mysticism volume's called, if you can remember the exact title?
Yeah, Quakers and Mysticism. Whoa, what's the exact title?
Well,
Quakers and Mysticism: Comparative and Syncretic Approaches to Spirituality.
Okay, and that's with Paul Grave, is that right?
Yeah. And so I edited that and wrote the introduction, and then a chapter on John Woolman, and lots of other people contributed great chapters to that. And that's been a really nice volume, I think, to get to consolidate some examples and some theorize a little bit on Quakers and mysticism. Yeah,
that's really helpful volume. A lovely piece of work, that. So you really developed as a writer and an editor. I know you edit Quaker Religious Thought as well. I should say as well that you were chair of the Quaker Studies unit at the American Academy of Religion, really in its formational years, and that's been a great service to the Quaker Studies community. And now you're working at University of Washington, not in Quaker Studies, but how's that working out for you?
Yeah, so now this last summer, I've taken a job at the University of Washington, which is a major research university, as an instructional designer. And what that basically means in this context is I'm developing online and e-learning for around on a product that helps researchers get grants. And so I'm taking the kind of the pedagogical skills and the researching skills and applying that to one of the the core functions of the research institution, which is to get grants and to facilitate funding in all areas for further research. University of Washington gets a lot of grant money, like over $1 billion, and they have they have a huge hospital that does all sorts of research, and as well as just everything. So I've been working on that, and some of my experiences along the way in what we've been doing in Quaker Studies has actually been very helpful. Like starting, Ben, you and I, and Giselle starting that program for the University of Lancaster back in 2014, I think. Yeah. Starting in that master's, which is no longer running, I believe, but that experience of kind of chipping in and developing curriculum and putting this course online, that then became a key component of, I kind of like to think about e-learning and online learning, and that opened the door for other opportunities.
So you're not just working now in religion and theology. I mean, you could be designing, educational materials in any field, or?
Yeah, mostly. I mean, primarily we are focused. My team is primarily focused around this system that allows researchers to effectively apply for grants.
Okay.
And so it's mostly on facilitating the research process. But prior to University of Washington, I was a contingent faculty at Pacific Lutheran University, which is a smaller private school, since 2016. And I created a course, and that'll be an asynchronous online course. I created that last year, and PLU has asked me to teach that. And so I'll also be, while I'm working in the day as an instructional designer, I'll be teaching religion in the evenings through this asynchronous course that I developed.
Excellent. Wow. Well, so I guess you won't have so much time for your own research at the moment, or?
Yeah, I am. What I'm hoping to do is to focus more selectively on the pieces of research that are most interesting to me, and really around John Woolman. And I'm going to I'm editing, guest editing for Quaker Studies, an issue that will be coming out next year on John Woolman, kind of a retrospective on the 250th anniversary of his death. And so that's going to be my key research project, and managing that for now. But and then we'll see what other opportunities arise along the way.
And I'm sure they will. So that's great. I mean, we're really pleased that you're still able to supervise as part of our team working with Birmingham. I know you're on the team for one of our students who's working on Joseph John Gurney. He, Quaker theologian of the 19th century. But I mean, if you could pick and choose, what would really excite you to come along that you would like to supervise?
Yeah, I think more stuff around John Woolman would be most exciting to me.
Yeah.
And then other another interesting topic might be like something around Jemima Wilkinson, who you started within Quakers and had these experiences, like these spiritual experiences that changed their life and formed this interesting religious community out of that. So really radical elements, like radical spiritualities, and how those have intersected with Quakerism, and those are the most interesting to me. So that's like, I like apocalypticism, this radical spirituality, and how that intersects with people's lives. So those are the topics.
The kind of the edge areas and the
yeah.
And I mean, how, if you had to say, well, I'm in this discipline, or I'm, how would you call yourself a theologian or a church historian, or a mix of those things? Or
no, that's a good question. So you kind of feel it out, like, do I just say I'm a theologian, or who is it I'm talking to? Like, sometimes I describe myself as a historical theologian, because so much of what I do is like the ideas of historical people, and all of, like, just the web of culture and ideas and philosophies that these historical people have experienced and how they've shaped them.
Okay, great. Well, Jon, I know you're going to need to get on with the rest of your day. It's been a great pleasure talking to you, and thank you. It's been really rich. You offered us lots of advice, great insights, and just interesting to hear your own journey as a scholar. So we will be back on November the 10th when Rhiannon will be speaking to Betty Hagland. And that will be at 4:00 UK time. And again, it will be live streamed, and you can catch up with it later on Facebook or YouTube. But thank you, Jon. And obviously, we'll be in touch as team members, and